Simon, it wasn't your former club's Crystal Palace's day against your old rivals Brighton, because Crystal Palace virtually crumbled on the day and lost the game by 4-1. And thereafter, all sorts of questions are being asked. Is it time up for Roy Hodgson? Should the board at Palace let Roy take the reins until the end of the season, stay in the Premier League, and then make a change? Or should they make a change now? Lots of frustration amongst the Crystal Palace support base, and Roy, for one, acknowledges that.
It's bad enough losing the game 4-1. It's bad enough dealing with that. You don't need to compound the misery by then confronting people who are obviously disappointed. They've come here with high hopes. They came here hoping to see Crystal Palace win. Not only did they not see Crystal Palace win, they saw Crystal Palace well beaten. So these frustrations are understandable, and I'm afraid that if you go over and you actually try to engage with the fans, they're probably going to be likely to let their feelings be known.
This is Roy Hodgson, Simon, who's proud man.
Yeah, I listened to Roy. I listened to his analysis after the game as well, and some of the comments he made. Look,
I mean, it wasn't just a scoreline as well, though, Simon. There was a back and forth between Palace players and the fans at full time. Joachim Andersen had to be pulled away from the Palace fans. There was anti-Steve Parish banner unveiled.
Yeah, I shouldn't have put that up, I know. Look, I mean, Roy talks about he was talking to a journalist after the game about the lack of endeavour that the players were being accused of, and he talks about there can be no argument there was an endeavour in the second half. Well, that's wonderful, Roy, but you went in 3 or 4-0 down at half time. So with the greatest respect in the world, it's much easier to come back when you've got nothing to play for and make an application in the second half when the game's gone. So I do think the fans have got some traction in this. I'm in the same camp to some extent as Roy, that Palace fans do need to remember that irrespective of my best efforts and Ron Nodes' best efforts, we couldn't keep this team in the Premier League for 10 years. There's nobody that wants to defend Steve Parish less than me, right? But let's have it right. And whilst the argument is that the longer you stay in the Premier League, and Graham will make this argument, the more you should be able to be a team that's progressing, there is an element of it doesn't always manifest itself that way. And Palace, I think, made a bad decision with Roy Hodgson in terms of re-employing him for this season. I think if you want to look at the world through a set of optics, which I think is a crappy way to do it, because optics don't always give you the full picture. It's the current way that we look at the world. The optics don't look right. But I do think that Roy was not an ambitious an extension. I think he was a decent appointment to come in and pick up the mess that Vieira had left for various reasons. But I think then not changing up and going, OK, we need to look a bit more progressive and forward-thinking, because he's not the long term, is he? You're not building a lot with Roy. You're ticking over. So that will land in the Palace fans' laps in terms of how they see their club. Roy talks about what Parish inherited, and I've got to correct that because it relates to me. He didn't pick up a mess. He picked up a club that had been built by me for 10 years, and I'd run out of money because of the biggest banking crisis in the world. Yeah. And he got a brilliant academy, and he got no debt, and he got to build on it.
What do you make of that? Did that hurt you, Simon? Roy said people's memories should be jogged.
But he doesn't know what he's talking about.
The club was in an awful state before he came.
Well, look, for me that's going to be personal, isn't it?
This is Steve Parish he's talking about.
Well, of course.
The club was in an awful state before he came, before Parish came.
His relationship was with Parish.
That's your era.
Yeah, of course. So his relationship was with Parish. So he doesn't know what condition the club was in when he came because he wasn't there. The club was in a great position. The only thing it was is his owner had run out of money. His owner had spent 40, 50 million quid, got hit in a raft of other things in a banking crisis, and left Steve Parish, who was in part one of the reasons why I had some of the problems I had, but that's a different discussion, in a situation where he can inherit a football club with 3 other people's money for nothing, with no debt, because who was the debt to? Me. It owed me the money, and I wrote it off and handed it to him. And it had a great academy that was producing lots of great players, like Nathaniel Klein.
How much did you write off?
40, 50 million quid, whatever. But the point is this.
That quickly.
But you got to, haven't you? So the point is this, is that's a false equivalency.
Yeah.
But he's also right to say, because that under Steve Parish, Crystal Palace, as a club that was always talked about as a club with a potential, the Man United of the South, when Venables was there, great opportunities in the team of the 80s, that once upon a time with that support base that could pull 50,000 fans into Selhurst Park during that 79-80 season, and then fell away again. And it's been a club that's often been considered a bit like a character from the Fast Show, a bit woo, a bit way, a bit of a bit of a soft underbelly, and I tried to change that and got Palace into a situation where it got promoted into the Premier League, got into 3 playoffs, and got into cup semi-finals, and did its business and was very aggressive in the way that it operated. And Parish has taken it on and put him in the Premier League. Now, he's jumped into bed with American owners. There's no huge ambition to spend inordinate amounts of money. But is there some nobility in, and I don't want to make it about Brighton because I admire Paul Barber and I admire Tony Bloom and I'm fond of Tony and I admire what he's done. But he put himself in the hole for 400 million quid to do that. And they've done some wonder. And the one thing that Palace fans can take umbrage with is why haven't they built a better recruitment process than the one they've currently got? Now, that's not a criticism of Dougie Freedman because I think Dougie's done a lot of the work that Palace have been successful as a result of.
Yeah.
I think it has to lay back at some of the forward-thinking ideals that maybe the board do and don't have. They're arguing amongst themselves. You've got Textor having a turn because Palace have voted against the transfers between linked clubs, and Textor coming out and saying that he'd never have done that if he'd known about this, that and the other.
Yeah.
I think there's a balance between... And
You,
having a go at the
you can
players,
feel the Palace fans' pain though, Simon. There's Dan. As a Palace fan, it's so disheartening. With 3-year head start in Brighton, getting into the Premier League, we're now 5 years behind them.
fine, but let's not make it about Brighton.
It's woeful leadership.
It's not make it about Brighton.
But Simon, what do you do? Yesterday at Arsenal, we were talking about Palace.
It's not woeful
and
leadership.
the chat was maybe it's time to say goodbye to Roy and bring in the likes of Steve Cooper this week.
Well, maybe it is.
This week.
Well, look, I mean, I said to you that I figured that if they didn't beat Sheffield United and then they got their heads handed them by Brighton, they'd find difficulty in staying with Roy. Or they got past Sheffield United, so they got 3 points. They went to Brighton, where a lot of teams, far better, far well-heeled teams than Palace have got their heads handed to them at Brighton. It happens to be an emotional reaction and a visceral reaction because it is Brighton. But let's get some context. Do I think that Roy Hodgson should be the manager?
Should he carry on from this point onwards?
Well, I think unless you've got it done and dusted with someone else that's really going to change the direction of travel with the group of players that you've got.
Would Cooper do that?
I don't know. I think probably that's where they'll go because it looks on paper like a progressive appointment. I mean, let's have it right. Nottingham Forest aren't exactly pulling up trees, are they? I mean, what we're doing here, we're saying the next progressive manager is Steve Cooper. And I like Steve Cooper. And I think that he's done a great job at getting Forest out of the Championship, which many, many managers couldn't do over a quarter of a century.
Yeah.
But
Something's got to change, Simon.
well, yes, of course it will change. Everything
I mean, you keep on
changes.
saying to me, Palace will be all right. They'll be all right.
They'll be all right. Of course, they'll be all right.
They'll be all right.
They'll be, yeah, but the Palace fans are
They'll
not
be
talking,
all right.
Palace fans are not talking about not being all right. They're talking about why aren't we pushing up the league?
Yeah.
Why are Brighton getting success and why aren't we getting success? And why aren't we moving on from that team that Pardew had that got us into the top half of the table a few years ago?
What do you think, Graham, when you think Crystal Palace?
But have you not answered it? You know, if they're making a direct comparisons, a comparison with Brighton, what debt are if Brighton are 400? Their owner is owed £400 million. What debt do Crystal Palace have at this time?
Not a huge amount.
That's your answer.
But the owners have no ambition. Parish is not going to put in his own money. He's never in the first place.
But that's why it's not a direct comparison. One team is in owes the owner £400
but it's a
million.
relatable comparison because the two
But
clubs are
it's
so
similar.
indexed to one another.
They don't
Yeah.
play again until Monday night. They don't play again until
They've got
week
Chelsea,
tonight.
right? They've got Chelsea.
Right,
next,
they've
haven't
got Chelsea. And we've spoken about Chelsea, and we know they're on the ropes for a variety of reasons. Just change Roy now. If you are in the hot seat, that's what I'm trying to get out of you.
Well, I wouldn't have put. It's difficult because I don't think like Paris because I'm not a weasel, so I wouldn't think that way. Right? But I wouldn't have put Hodgson into situ in the first place for the next season.
Would
so
you?
I can't think that way.
I'm not sure. I think it was a safe pair of hands.
For last year,
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think we mentioned this the last time we spoke about it. They should have had someone with Roy saying he is the successor. He's going to learn from me. He's going to understand the players, which Roy did. He understands the football club.
Yeah.
And there should have been a succession in place. So now they're
It lacked ambition, and that's what the
Thinking of change.
Palace.
But I know you hate the word optics, Simon, but what does it look like? I mean,
It looks like a safe pair of
Elise,
hands.
Michael Elise, was it a pointless gamble? I mean, Elise was deemed not fit enough to start the match. There were 3 down. He brings him on. He's injured last 8 minutes.
But
Goodbye, Michael Elise.
he can't do right for doing wrong in that
Right,
instance,
right.
right? He takes Eze off in a game that he thinks, I'll tell you what, this game is gone. We're losing 1-0 to Everton in the FA Cup. I've got bigger fish to fry here. I'm going to take Eze off, and he gets slaughtered, right? Because they go and play Arsenal on the weekend, put Eze back in the side, and they get beat 5, right? So now he puts Elise on because no doubt the Palace fans will be going, get him on. He puts him on, pulls a hamstring, off he comes again, or whatever he's done.
Right.
So he can't do right for doing wrong in that respect.
Graham's right, though. Should they not? And I know it's easy with the benefit of hindsight, put Roy in, but put a young, aspiring,
I think,
Yeah.
I think that's what they should have
ambitious
done.
guy.
Okay,
beside
but let me
him.
ask you, Graham, how you think that really works. Who are you suggesting is going to work as Roy Hodgson's understudy?
Well, I think Roy, vastly experienced football man. I think he could have been part of the conversation a year ago. I'll come back and do it, but I think obviously I've got a short shelf life at my age, and I think it's time he should be looking for the one beyond me. So I think Roy
clearly he
could have been
didn't
part
want
of
to
that
do that, would he?
conversation.
Because he could have had that conversation.
No, but I'm saying he could have and should have been part of the conversation.
But here's the question.
So it's forward planning.
He gets brought in to fix a problem that
It
Vieira...
suggests a lack of long-term planning,
Well,
Simon,
of
doesn't
course
it?
it does.
Doesn't it?
And it would...
So they stand accused of that, and rightly so.
And they would be rightly found guilty of that because there's no longevity in Roy Hodgson.
But that's
Should
not
they
fine, they
change
should
it
have-
now, Simon? A week tonight, should
But-
Roy
but
take them
if
into the
Roy
game
had
against
no-
Chelsea?
So if I'm sitting there as Parish, right, Rod Stewart's son gone wrong, right, and I'm looking across the table and going, I've got Roy Hodgson in front of me, and Roy, here's what I want to do with you. I want you to grandfather someone else in, right? And Hodgson goes, well, I don't want to do that. I want to
I
do another
think
year. What am I going to do then?
No, I think you
I'll
should.
say, right, out you go then, Roy.
No, we're
And
in
someone else comes
trouble. We're in trouble. We want you to come in because you know the club.
No,
know
you've
the
missed the
players.
point, Gray.
No, but I'm getting to
He's
it.
done that.
I'm getting to it.
So they give him another contract in the summer.
I don't think if that had been put to Roy, he would have poo-pooed it. You know,
But they
you're
gave
aware.
him a
He's
deal.
aware of his age.
They brought him in.
I'm kind of agreeing on that.
No, I hear what you're saying, but let's get the context right. They bring him in February, right? All of a sudden, the team's playing a brand of football because he's got a different group of players than the previous group we had. Then everyone's going, "What has happened to Roy Hodgson? He's playing a different brand." The summer comes up, they go to Roy, "We'll give you a 1-year extension." Now, at that point, right, Palace had a choice. And Roy had a choice. Roy could have said, well, I'm 107. I'm not going to make this much longer. What I'd rather do is groom a successor.
Yeah.
How old is he?
75 is Neil's age.
Well,
isn't it?
Neil Warnock's 75. I don't know about Roy.
I think he's a
But
bit
Simon,
older. I think Roy's 76.
Again,
He's a
the
bit older.
bottom line, Simon, is should Roy stay with the reins until next Monday and going against
Well, depends
Chelsea?
who you're asking. If you're asking Roy, he's going to say yes. If you're asking the ownership, it's their job to make a decision. They're capable of it. They brought Frank de Boer in. That was a joke. They pivoted, and you've got to give. You know,
Yeah.
when someone makes a bad mistake, the question, the integrity of leadership is, can you pivot? And they did. Now, I don't think they'll have any compunction about changing if they've got the right guy to come in. But it's not about firing people. It's about hiring the right person.
Yeah.
Anyone can fire anybody. It's
Well,
easy.
Roy's 76.
Yeah.
Look at this morning. There's Neil Warnock goes into Aberdeen at 75. But would it not be the more prudent? And I'm a great admirer of Roy Hodgson, but clearly it's misfiring. Clearly Palace are misfiring.
Yep.
Clearly time is running out. They will be all right. I agree
Sheffield
with
United.
you.
They beat Sheffield United
But,
midweek.
but
And they've drawn a lot of games. And I know, and I'm not sitting here as a blinkered Palace fan because I'm very objective and I often like to steer out of the conversation of Palace because I
Yeah.
don't want to be a former owner.
No, sure.
Putting his 2 penneth in. I hated it when it was done to me. But they'll be fine. The decision to have made Roy Hodgson a manager for last year was probably a decision that angered the Palace fans because it showed a lack of ambition. When I put Stevie Kemba in place, the Palace fans went, "What's that about? You know, he's in the building already. Where's your ambition?" And I had my views on it, and I was wrong, and I fired him after 3-4 months, right? He wanted the job, and in this instance, Roy Hodgson is a safe pair of hands. And right now, the Palace fans are seeing a team that isn't inspiring to watch, that isn't winning very much.
There's Jeff, a Palace fan. I look at Roy's body language and his after-match interviews. I believe Roy wouldn't mind being asked to stand down now.
Well, I'll tell you what, the only way you know that, I mean, I remember with a friend of ours, I remember when I let Trevor go, the only thing that was holding Trevor up was my wanting him to be there. He didn't want to be there anymore. And he was relieved when I said to him,
Yeah.
the time's come up now.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then Parish will know that with Hodgson. He'll see in the fact that the only thing that's really keeping him in the job is a bit of pride.
Yeah.
And the owner. And that's for the owner to judge that, not for the outside world to go, well, I see his body language. When you're getting beat 4 by Brighton and the Palace fans are booing you, your body language is going to be a bit off, isn't it? Because you're a bit fed up.
Of course. So, I mean, Palace fans, you know what's going on at the club at the moment. You know, a lot has been spoken about Roy Hodgson. Of course, the man has a huge pedigree in the game and is much respected. But is he on borrowed time now? And it's Chelsea next, a week tonight. Would it be more prudent to make the change
Well, that's
now?
3 points.
Would you back that? Would you back the board to make a change now and bring in the likes of Steve Cooper? He's the name that people are talking about. 03717 223344 81089. Graham, you watch from distance like many of us do regards Crystal Palace. When you look at Palace, What do you think of them? Simon knows the club inside out. It's a big part of his growing up, and it's very much dear to him. What about you?
Well, I think they've missed their key men. People will open the door and people will score goals. If you don't score goals, you're going to be in trouble. Would that be a fair assessment, Simon?
Yeah, I think there's a variety
You know,
of
they don't
things.
carry a big squad.
Yeah.
I think they've lost key players that are the difference.
Funny enough, Wilf Zaha's banging them in for Galatasaray.
Well, Eze was injured for the beginning of the season, and that took an edge off them.
At least
because
he's
he's
been injured a
creative.
lot.
Yeah, and Elise has been injured.
You know,
and
we
the boys
talk
that they've bought, you know, Matepa
But
doesn't
those
score
two,
goals.
just
Edward didn't score a lot of goals. I mean, he came in from
they
Celtic.
were the two I was thinking about. You know, we talk about small margins all the time that win football matches.
Yeah.
There's your answer.
Yeah. Palace fans very keen to talk to us this lunchtime, and I'm delighted about that. But does change with Roy Hodgson bring about much change, if you know where I'm going? Darren's a big Palace fan. Darren, good afternoon to you. Where's your head with it? Do you think Roy with his reputation and his pedigree in the game, is it time to change him, Darren, at this stage in the season and bring in someone like Steve Cooper?
Afternoon, guys. Yeah, thanks for having me on again. This is the third time now in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
Seriously, I mean, the question is, yes, he has to go. I'm listening to Simon and Graham there in terms of he's the right man, he'll keep us up, we're not going to go down. I just don't know what anyone is watching at the moment that leads you to believe that we're going to stay in the division. We beat Sheffield United the other week, as you just mentioned, but that wasn't on Roy Hodgson. That was because we had two individual talents in Elise and Eze that ultimately tore Sheffield United apart, and they couldn't cope with them. As soon as they both went off injured, we ended up sitting back for 20 minutes. We made defensive-minded substitutions instead of bringing França and a Hamada on or Edouard on that can get us further up the field. And we ended up nearly conceding in the last 5 minutes when they hit the crossbar. I mean, if we can't sack the manager after a 4-1 defeat to our rivals, when we've only won 3 in 18 and 6 in 24, I think that says it all, really, of how low we've become as a football club.
Simon, what would you... Go on, Darren.
I mean, listen, Darren, I mean, we will agree to disagree on certain things. I think that Palace will stay in the Premier League, and I'm not suggesting that's a major attribute or that Roy Hodgson should be praised for it. And I personally wouldn't employ Roy Hodgson, not because I don't like him personally, but I don't feel that the brand of football that he wants to play. When he was England manager, it was always quite reactive. But what do you think? It's one thing taking a manager out, right? We can all do that, as I said. Who are you going to bring in then?
Well, you know, if it was me, I mean, I was going to ask Graham a question as well, but if it was me, Simon, what I would do personally is if they've got this big plan in the summer, then surely it would make sense to bring Dougie Friedman into the mix for the last 3-4 months.
But that's assuming Dougie wants to do it. Now, Dougie's
Well, let's assume he does.
Well, I can assume that he wouldn't, quite frankly, because I know Dougie's relationship with management and how he did it when he was at Bolton and Nottingham Forest, and I don't think he has a burning ambition to get back in the dugout. I think he quite likes the idea of being a director of football and quite likes the responsibility that goes with that. And I'd be surprised. He'll do it if Palace ask him, but I don't think that's his particular ambition.
So it's risky either which way, Darren, right?
And I'm not suggesting that he comes in longer term, but I think you guys have just said that Palace aren't going to go down. Now, I think regardless on who's the manager, and my question to Graham is if Graham was available, and he's been a manager and he was available, would he believe that he could keep Crystal Palace Football Club up?
There you
because
go.
I believe anybody could keep Crystal Palace up at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's listen. It's Crystal Palace, and with all due respect, I think you have a healthy squad, but a fragile squad. I think you have a squad that's more incapable of staying in the Premier League, but it's keeping your goals are everything in football. I mentioned about Liverpool earlier, why they're dangerous, because they've got goals. They don't have to play brilliantly, but they've got goals. And I just think you're missing those two players, and you mentioned them, you referenced them when they went off injured. Palace look a very different team. And I think your ills are all about not having them available all the time. If you could promise me that they would have those two be fit for all the games between now and the rest of the season, they stay up.
Yeah.
They stay up.
Yeah.
No argument. They stay up.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is how fragile you are, because you're Crystal Palace, who don't carry the biggest of squads.
Sure. Dan, listen, thank you. Simon, we're going to move on. Many other Palace fans trying to get on so that they can speak to you, Simon, principally. There's a message. There's a message there from another Steve. I am so disappointed. I can't watch them at the moment. It's the club I love, but I've never wanted to watch them at
this
this
is
particular
Jim.
time because there is no point.
This is the time. He calls himself a supporter. This is the time they need his support.
Yeah, they need your support right now. Steve's another Palace fan. Steve, good afternoon to you. What do you want to say?
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to embark upon what Roy Hodgson has done. I mean, basically, I've got no gripe with Roy Hodgson, but realistically, he doesn't change anything. He keeps everything the same. He'll bring on the same players. When I saw the lineup for the weekend, I knew we weren't going to win that game. It was pretty obvious.
So
we went out there to defend.
So do they change
We
it
had
now,
no
Steve?
attacking. Sorry?
Do they change it now?
Yeah, I think they should change it. Even if they just put Paddy McCarthy in charge, they should do something that gives it some fresh impetus. I don't think they've got that.
Steve, listen, thanks for the call. I mean, Simon, obviously, they are
I mean, Darren says
somewhat
previous-
in turmoil.
Well, they are to some extent because the fans are making a dog and pony show about it.
You always
It's
said a 4-act play.
4-act play. I was trying to pivot and say something different. Is it ideal that they're watching their side not give them what they think they're entitled to? And is it ideal that they're seeing the major opposition in their mind's eye beat them 4-1? But when Brighton get beat 4-0 by Luton midweek, you know there's going to be a reaction. So it's the worst thing that could have happened to bloody Brighton was get beat for 4-0. But the worst thing to happen for Palace that Brighton got beat 4-0 by Luton in the middle of the week because you're going to get a bounce back. And Brighton are a bloody good side, tragically. Now, with Hodgson, Darren said earlier on, well, anyone can keep him in the league. So what's the point of a change now then? Well, you're going to put Paddy McCarthy in the dugout. What for?
But when you
What
see
for?
these placards and banners going up and they want change and you're in the boardroom,
Yeah.
you're going to pay no heed to them.
Depends what kind of personality you are. I mean, you've made a decision. If you're being dogmatic about it and bloody minded, and you're just not going to change because you won't be told, that's one thing. If you see it for yourself and you've gone, you know what, it's reached the end of the road. There's no point having this anymore. I've got XYZ manager lined up. I'll make the decision now. If you haven't got XYZ manager lined up and you think to yourself, this is fragile, and I've got the football nous in Roy Hodgson, it's not ideal, and he's going to take a few brickbacks, but he'll get us past the line. If you believe that, you stay with what you've got.
Steve Parrish should be talking to people who, his questions to people who are maybe embedded in the dressing room. What are the players saying? What are they thinking?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the chairman, stroke chief exec types
Stop
are guided.
that. Well, he shouldn't be doing that.
No, but I guarantee that's happening.
Oh, no, but
so
that's
you
been-
wouldn't have done that?
No, not. What? Listen to them. Listen to the
No.
players. They'll be the last person
but
I listen to.
But I think that is how the tail wags the dog today.
Yeah, but if they're doing that, then they'll get the wrong information.
That old chestnut
Okay.
comes out.
Okay.
He's lost the dressing room.
Yeah.
All right. Roy is a man in place and continues to be so, but we'll stay across it.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the TalkSport app and on your smart speaker. TalkSport.